All right, my clock says 1 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Yesterday, some areas in the Midwest, including central Iowa and Ames, received significant damage to homes, businesses, grain bins, and crops due to yesterday's extremely powerful winds. And many people are still without power. So just know that if you are affected by this, you're in our thoughts and prayers. But thankfully, the Blairs experienced relatively minimal damage to their farm. And so in true show business fashion, we decided that the show must go on. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for the Growing High Quality Food Grade Oats Field Day. My name is Rebecca Clay, and I'm with Practical Farmers of Iowa. And today, I'm broadcasting from Sioux City, Iowa. Unable to join us, but worth recognizing, is Haley Nelson, who organized this virtual field day. But unfortunately, like I said, is unable to join us due to the power outage in Ames. So thank you, Haley, for putting in all the legwork to make this field day happen. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce our generous hosts, AJ and Kelly Blair. AJ and Kelly operate a fourth-generation farm near Dayton, Iowa. And the Blairs have been incredibly innovative in the ways that they meet their farm financial and conservation goals, including bringing back cattle to their farm, using cover crops, raising crops without tillage, growing small grains, and way more, so much more that I'm unable to mention it all in this brief introduction. But in the last couple of years, they've expanded their repertoire of operations even further by deciding to grow food-grade oats. And beyond simply growing food-grade oats, AJ and Kelly have really dug in and done their research on best practices on growing these oats to make sure that they're consistently high-yielding and high-test weight oats. And so I'm really excited that we get to learn from Kelly and AJ today. But before we delve into our content, we'd like to thank the sponsors who made this virtual field day possible. With their support, PFI has been able to put on over 60 virtual field days this season. And these field days are online, broadcasting to you in the comfort of your air-conditioned home, office, or shop. And best of all, they're free of charge. So thank you again to these sponsors for their support and for making this happen. But of course, the field day wouldn't be a field day without some promotion on behalf of the host organization. So let me tell you a little bit about PFI. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a farmer-led nonprofit based out of Ames, and we specialize in farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing and farmer-led research. In the next week, hopefully after Ames has regained power and our website is actually working, we invite you to check out our website and learn a little bit more about our organization and look into some of our resources. So our website is practicalfarmers.org. Be sure to check that out once it's back up. And so let's just briefly go over some housekeeping items before we dig in here. The field day is going to last an hour, so it's going to go until 2 p.m. Central Time. And we want to make this field day as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask questions throughout. Kelly and AJ are going to be pausing to do some Q&A throughout the field day, and then we'll have some additional time for Q&A at the very end. And then finally, once you close out of Zoom, a dialog box will appear on your device with a link to fill out an evaluation. And so we just ask you to take a few minutes to fill out this evaluation so that PFI can continue to improve our programming. And next, I just want to go over how the different ways that we'll be able to ask questions. So we'll be able to do that in two different ways. The first one is via the chat box. And so to do this, you can hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen until this black bar pops up. And then you can click on the chat box. And then once the chat box pops up, we'll ask you that you change this blue box from all panelists to all panelists and attendees, just so that we're all able to see the questions and not just AJ and Kelly. And then after that, you can type your comment and press enter. So let's go ahead and just practice that really quick, and we'll see who all is calling in. So go ahead and open the chat box now using those instructions that I just said, and then change it from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. And then go ahead and write your name and where you're watching from, just so we can get an idea of who all is here. And while you're doing that, I just want to go over the second option for asking questions. You can also raise your hand right next to the chat box, and then I'll be able to unmute you so that you can ask your question aloud verbally. So it looks like people are entering where they're from in the chat box. Thank you guys for that. Okay, and so without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and AJ and Kelly, it looks like you're unmuted already, but you can go ahead and start sharing your screen, and then you can go ahead and introduce yourself and start your presentation.
All right. Well, thank you for having us here, and we're excited to at least do this in a, not so much of the normal way that we usually do this is on our farm and outside. It's actually a really beautiful day. It would have been a great day to have a field day out on the farm, but this will work. Please let us know if you're having trouble hearing us or anything like that. We'll try our best to fix it if we can. So I am Kelly Blair, and I farm full time with my husband AJ, and we have 2 kids, Wyatt and Charlotte, that we did kick outside for this conference call thing, and we'll see if that actually stays that way. We farm just south of Fort Dodge, Iowa, so north central. And we thankfully did not get storm damage, as it looks like most of Iowa did end up getting. We were pretty lucky and only got a ½ inch of rain. So thanks for having us, and thanks for being here with us. You want to say anything?
No. I'm glad we were able to do this, and probably lost some attendees dealing with power and weather. So I guess we're pretty fortunate here.
So we'll jump right into it. Go ahead, AJ.
We thought we'd just start with the pre-season stuff we went through with oats. The planning part of it, the site selection, our first year, this is our second year. So the first year we picked a couple fields that needed tile. To do good oats, you need them in early. So the wet farms, we thought, we'll put oats on and tile them in the summer. Well, we weren't able to get into those fields early last year, it being wet. So it's a good place to tile in the summertime if you get the oats in. But then conversely, you also need there's a lot of springs where you need a dry spring, or the well-tiled farms are the only ones you're going to be able to get in early to get the yield out of the oats. So oats, as far as we can tell, it's a lot of maybe not the kind of management you're used to with corn and soybeans. I mean, planting date is probably one of the bigger yield drivers, and variety selection for test weight. So it's not like, well, we'll just do high management and come away with high yielding oats. So it seems like a couple big things that drive how the oat season goes. So this program, we found out, we were asked through Practical Farmers if we wanted to participate. So we're raising a food grade oat for, it's for Oatly. They make oat milk. They're directly the ones that instigated this program. It goes to grain millers in St. Ansgar. So we need, I guess, the end product, it's going to food and it has a certain characteristic. So the end product is gluten-free. So for us, knowing rye has gluten in it, and we do also a lot of rye cover crops. So just right there, you just need to think through a couple seasons. If we would have jumped into this in the wintertime and said, yeah, and then realized we don't have any fields that would even work because we've got rye cover crop growing, that volunteer rye would come up, and then the result would be you can't spray for rye in the oats. So then we're not going to pass the inspection for the end user. So you're on a food grade product, you're raising for a market. So you just need to spend a little more time with the grain buyer or the end user. If we're raising number 2 yellow corn in Iowa, you haul it to the co-op and they'll take it. But you just need to make sure you're doing things correctly so that it's a product the end user wants. We have some weed issues in soybeans. We've been doing a lot of non-GMO soybeans that's created some some more severe weed issues than we'd like. So this was a great place to rotate out of corn and beans for an extra year, kind of break up that weed cycle. So that's a good thing. You know, you see oats a lot more on the organic side, the transition side, but it's, you know, you can only go so long with chemicals, and the longer you can make a rotation, or it changes the chemicals you can use to have a little better success. So it just helps with weed pressure. And then it's a system with corn and soybeans and oats to hopefully benefit your corn and soybeans. So as you're doing it, you do need to think a couple of years down the road. It's a 3-year, maybe even 4 or 5 if you're putting alfalfa under it or something. So it's just a little more, you know, you plant corn one year and the next year it doesn't really matter. You can go back to corn or soybeans, and if you put the oats there, you kind of need to intentionally use that to benefit the corn and bean year. So just make sure you're planning that into your rotation more than a year ahead. Just kind of think about what was in the field last year and how do we want the field to look the next couple of years. So
we also have cattle, and so if we don't make test weight, or if, you know, something happens that we can't take it to food grade, you know, we get some rye in there or something, then we actually have the cattle to fall back on to use it. So it's kind of the cattle help with our risk management there as well.
So we put 3 bushel an acre, we have a 10-inch drill, 7.5 or 10 inches. I think a lot of people will even broadcast and work in. So the only issue with our 10-inch drill is probably some weed control. I don't think that they want narrow spacing for small grains, but they said 10 inches is probably, we're just giving up some weed control, letting a little more light through more than any yield issues. So as far as how to seed it, with or without like a clover underneath, for us, all of our fields, we plan on doing something in them after we harvest. So we've just seeded oats by itself. If we weren't going to do anything, we seeded a cover crop for grazing, or we're planning on tiling, and then we'll go in and seed after that work's done. So if you were just going to cut oats and leave it, you'd probably want to underseed with some clover. So that, you know, pre-planting, you want to kind of know what we're planning on planting if you want to do something with it. Early seeding, last year we got in April 15th. It was real wet. We left one field. We never did put oats on it. And in 2020, we were able to get it in March, so the 30th of March. We had good dry weather. We pretty well got them put where we wanted them. So the weather has a big effect. Our yields were quite a bit better in 2020. Mm-hmm. So I think the planting date probably had a lot to do with that. And then seed selection, we've picked the Rains variety. It shows up with high test weight. Since we're raising a food grade oat, test weight's probably the number one thing. If we don't make test weight, we aren't going to be able to deliver to the end user. So that's the main concern. Both years we've made test weight. Last year was about 36 pounds. This year we were coming back around 40 from the scale tickets. So the test weight, I think they want 38 as a minimum, and they'll dock you down to 36 for this program through grain millers. So that's where they're at. Last year we were just above the 36, getting them in there. So most of that information we've gotten from PFI and Iowa State. Does a team trial every year. So Rains is a newer variety that showed up pretty well for test weight and at the end yield. It's got a really good lodging score. It's a short oat. We don't get as much straw. We do want the straw and use it, but we're going to give up some straw yield to make sure we make test weight. And there were 2 or 3 varieties that showed up pretty well for test weight and yield. So this is the one we picked. I think somewhere in here they were going to reference that PFI Iowa State.
It's in the chat webinar box. If you go to there, it has the oat variety trial results linked there from Rebecca. So maybe
going back to that also, the oats are primarily the variety primarily drives what goes on there. If it's a resistant variety to funguses, they're not getting any yield or test weight benefit to fungicides. If it's an older variety that's susceptible to a lot of disease, then they are getting a benefit, a yield and test weight benefit. But the variety has a lot to do with making what you want it to end up like. So during the growing season, we did spray this year. Last year we used 2,4-D dicamba. This year, sounds like dicamba maybe is hard on the oats, so we just used the 2,4-D enlist. We have the biggest problem in the oats are fall and winter annuals. So mare's tail is a big one, and then thistles. So we're thinking maybe it'd be a good idea just a fall spray, probably a 2,4-D dicamba type fall spray, and that might help a lot with any weed pressure we do have during the growing season. So the oats come up so early, they get ahead of a lot of the water hemp type product or weeds. So it's more the winter annuals that are already growing when the oats come up. So we have not done a residual. I hadn't even thought about it. And now that we've talked to more oat people, you pick up things. So maybe a spring residual would save an in-season pass. So something we haven't looked at, but we'll probably look at and put a little more time into weed control. Historically, oats didn't even have herbicide. You just didn't need to spray them, and we probably don't need to spray them, but it's an option to clean up weeds for us. So we're making sure we try to keep the fields clean. Because of the variety selection, we haven't used fungicide. Iowa State's trial has shown that. So as far as test weight or yield, and fungicide goes on around flag leaf time. That's fairly early in the growing season for us. Last year we were too busy with other crops spraying herbicides, and it's a clean out on the sprayer, and you just worry about stuff like that. So we didn't have any pressure when we needed to spray it, so we left it. And so this year we didn't even, we scouted, but we didn't spray either. And I think that's been okay for us. Mm-hmm. The trials this year we did was on nitrogen. The cattle manure did not provide the nitrogen we thought it would. AMS and urea has been our program in the spring after the oats are up. That seems to be a pretty good product. The Northeast Research Farm, Iowa State's got 5 or 6 research farms in these trials. And when I talk to them, their yields are always better than everybody else's. And I talked to the manager, and he said, well, we don't usually put nitrogen on oats, on soybeans. And we'll talk about that later in the season, in the slides here. Mm-hmm. This field, we were doing some alfalfa seeding. So on the left side of the screen, there's alfalfa seeded under there, so we didn't spray anything on it. We didn't want to kill the alfalfa seeding. So the left side is a bushel an acre, just as a comfort for the alfalfa, and the right side is 3 bushels an acre that we harvested. And I made sure I stayed away with the sprayer. I didn't want to get too close to the alfalfa. So you can see as you move to the right, the oats clean up pretty well with the spraying, and on the left, you can see the mare's tail came through pretty hard. That was actually the day I was mowing. I stopped on the line and took a picture. So we mowed the oats that day for hay on the left side of the screen, and then about 2 weeks later, we came back and combined the oats on the right. So that's just a visual of with and without herbicide on that field.
It was a really dry year for us thus far, and we only got a half inch from yesterday's storm, but this is just showing you how dry of a year it was, and we're just going to deal with it.
So 36 is the cutoff for test weight, and through this program, grain millers, part of the deal was their Oatly wants oats grown in the United States. They're Sweden.
Help us out.
I think we have an Oatly person on here, but
yeah.
Yeah, they want to have oats in the country. In Sweden, where they originated, all their oats come from Sweden. And here, obviously, you know, in the Midwest, most of the oats come out of Canada. So they're trying to get more oats in the U.S. So this program is just to see how they get, see how we can get oats now originated from the Midwest. So part of the program was you guys in Iowa do it, and we'll back you. If they don't make test weight, we'll get you a market. And with the cover crop issues the last couple of years, prevent plant last year, I don't think getting rid of them is an issue, but that's another benefit to this trial program is making sure we have a place to go with the oats.
Sarah is on from Oatly, and she said, yep, Sweden, and the oats that they get them from are mostly from Canada for the U.S. product. So now some in Iowa. Yeah,
as a company, you know, that's what this program started as, is just a desire to source more U.S. oats for their product. So, so this year, our original test was 38 pounds, and I think the scale tickets were coming back closer to 40. So we try to, whatever the combine, you know, we don't have a good history of growing oats, so we're just kind of open the book to the settings page and set it for oats. But we just, you know, if we're running the fan trying to put it 100 or 150 RPM faster than what the book says to blow out any light oats, doesn't seem to bother the yield. I'm not finding a lot of oats on the ground, but I just, you know, as far as test weight, just try to make sure we're getting the heavy oats, and anything that's not going to make test weight, let's just blow it out and not have it affect their test weight. So last year we vac the oats. I think probably gained a half to a pound of test weight using a vac. This year they were heavy enough, we just put them straight in the truck without a vac. But that's another way to clean them up, is just, you know, that vac discharges a lot of the chaff and stuff that's in there. So that helps with test weight if you're kind of on the edge. We straight cut the oats. We don't really have swathing equipment and a pickup head. So another reason we don't underseed, just so we don't run into issues of, you know, trying to get oats out of clover in certain years. But we've straight cut. Most farmers are going to have that equipment. We haven't had an issue as long as we're putting them in a bin with air. Just make sure you're set up with air. And I think we started at showing 16% or so, but by the time, you know, we only took a couple easy days and we were done. And I think they were down to 12 or 13 by the time we finished. So we've just put them in a bin on air. That's another reason the variety trials will show lodging scores. We haven't had any issues with this variety. It's a shorter variety, and I think as long as you select for that, shouldn't have a lot of issues with oats going down on you in that way. So we have baled the straw, so we windrowed it. You could, if you were just doing clover, you could probably spread it out the back, or I would guess you can maybe bale a windrow off the top of clover. So we bale it, got about a ton an acre, and let's see, the last would be the bin. So windrowing, you know, you're going to let it sweat in the windrow, lets you harvest or swath it a little bit earlier in case you are having issues with lodging, or an air bin. And then they wanted the oats right away this year. They're real short, but as far as this program, and I'm guessing grain millers typically gets a lot of oats in August. So it's a nice way to utilize grain bins that are sitting empty in July and August. So it's not a storage issue. And then that's less acres we have to store of corn and soybeans. So as far as your whole storage, rather than build another bin, you know, a field of oats is a field that's not in corn to store or soybeans. So that works out really well, and we're typically not as busy that time of year. You know, talk.
You're doing so good. This is just showing, you know, like we said, we have it coming out we don't spread the straw, and we'll come in and just bale behind the combine once it's dry enough. This year it was a little wet, but we got it done. Make sure my mute is off here. This is just of us in the combine. You can see the rust coming off of the oats, but like we said, we scouted for it and didn't need any fungicide at the time where the fungicide application is necessary. So you could really see it. You know, the combine was pretty rusty by the end, but they did really well for us. And AJ kind of talked about time. And we like the oats. We like the small grains because we're a family of 4 with pretty young kids. And you can see my son is driving the grain cart, catching for me there. And it gives us time to kind of do a harvest in the middle of the year, I guess you could say. Instead of having all the acres in to get planted, you know, for corn and soybeans, we have some already done by the time we get to corn and soybeans. We have basically a harvest year in the middle of the year, like right after 4th of July. It was probably just as busy as harvest usually is. We're in the field combining and then getting the oats out of the field, putting it in the bin, getting the straw baled, and then getting the bales off and then putting down cover crop. And so it's just like harvest, but yet we're kind of spreading it out over the year. So as a young family, spreading out that labor for us is pretty important, and being able to spend some time with the kids here and there. Okay.
Another thing, that picture on the right, all that green water hemp, that is a field we're going to tile here probably starting next week. And like I said, I mean, we picked the drill up in some spots that we had a dry spring and we were able to get to some of these wetter farms, but you know, that farm has a couple spots that didn't get seeded, and that's kind of what you're dealing with oats. You don't worry so much about it being wet. You just try to get them in, and then but now we got a place in August to tile. So, and you can definitely see where the water hemp, you know, the pressure difference between where the oats were and where they weren't. So there's a lot of weed pressure. But anyway, so that's a visual there on the getting them seeded early and kind of dealing with some muddy spots.
If anybody has any questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat box. Oh, we got one there. Given the ground isn't too wet, what is your general rule for planting date?
We don't have a lot of history with oats other than what, you know, we've learned, but I don't think you can plant them too early. Everybody said your best oats get a snow on them. So I think typically I always remembered a week in March, we'd get in and do something in the field, either tile or all manure or seed oats or something. But we've had trouble getting those for 3 or 4 years. But I think if you can get that window in March, sounds like, I don't know that there's a specific date, but if you can get it in before the 1st of April, that's probably going to help you the most. At a meeting last winter, we were talking and a guy said, we got a dry field planted and then the others were too wet. And so I just left it. We didn't put oats there. And he said, you know, that's probably the best plan is if it starts getting too late, just go to something else. So I think the later you get, you just drop your yield so much that just being flexible and having the ability to go to a different crop. So that's all probably weather and seasonal based, and we all know how that works. So.
Are there any other questions out there so far of what we've talked about or gone over?
AJ and Kelly, this is Rebecca. I've just got a follow-up question to Ben's question. What's kind of your like drop dead, it's too late to plant oats date? I know that you said that you planted as late as April 15th, but like how late is too late?
Yeah, and in 2019, they made 70 bushel an acre. That, I don't think that's terrible. So that worked out all right. I think what you run into is the summertime heat when you're filling your grain. You just lose a lot of the test weight and stuff. As in 2019, I think our yield loss came from a real hot spell we had. It was in the vegetative stage in the corn fairly early summer, and that affected the oats when they were actually filling grain. So
I think it depends on what your goal is as well. you know, if you want to make that test weight, that April 15th was probably right at the date that maybe we wanted to maybe stop, especially depending on the year. This year was cooler, so I don't know what would have happened, but I guess you just gotta work with your local experts and figure it out.
Yeah, so I think if you have the option to take them for hay and don't care about the grain, or taking them for a cover crop seed, I don't think seed is as big of an issue. You may be giving up some yield, but you can go a little later if you're trying to hit a high test weight oat. Probably need to be more concerned about an early planting date. So you all know how weather changes every year, and in general, the later you go, the less your corn and beans yield, the less your oats are going to yield. So relative to the crop. So I think you just have to make that judgment call year to year. But at some point, you know, just like corn and beans, you decide it's too late. So we had another question about drilling. So we no-till drilled everything into soybean stubble this year. We got along really good that way. Last year we did the same, didn't we? We didn't field cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
So I know sometimes a lot of people try to scratch the ground a little bit to get it to dry out, to get the oats in the next day. Or if you're going to broadcast them with some fertilizer and then work them in with a field cultivator. Otherwise, it seems like for us, tillage is an extra pass. It takes another day. You know, if you can do the tillage a lot of times, let's just go ahead and squeak through with the drill and get them in. So we haven't had any issues going into soybean stubble, just drilling them.
And it's me usually drilling, and it would probably be me doing the tillage. So if I did tillage and drill, there'd be more chances of me breaking things. So we're not gonna do that.
So then after harvest, we've got 3 different plans for different fields. Grazing as a cover crop. What do we use there? The sorghum sudan grass. So or pearl millet and teff grass to graze. We've got a field with sorghum sudan grass. We're planning on baling, and tillage radish and crimson clover on a field that we're just going to leave. So we're hoping to get some clover for nitrogen the next year. So a lot of options afterwards, depending on what you're planning on doing. We've got 2 fields, so about 80 acres of this. So hopefully, if we can get caught up with a few other projects, we'll start tiling next week. So that's been a big benefit. Our weather hasn't even allowed spring and fall tiling. It's all we can do to get the crop off. So we're using it to extend grazing on the cows, kind of stretch pasture, and get some work, any work we can't get done other times of the year. This has helped us a lot to spread this around and do it on other farms. So
we were pretty excited about the cover crop getting in so early. Again, the benefits of, you know, harvesting in July, but we've had just probably a 1/2 inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch on the cover crop. So it's slow coming up, and we're still hoping that it's going to pop here. We really hope it doesn't germinate and then just die, but we would have had more pictures for you, but there wasn't much to take for you. So
everything's just kind of germinated to a couple inches tall. So it's growing and it's out there. And so we'll just
be patient.
We'll have it to use at some point.
This is our, we talked about, we did a nitrogen trial on our oats this year, and we had our Peterson Crop Services from Dayton go out and take a drone photo of it, and you can see the where we used 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre using AMS urea mix versus none, and that showed up pretty well all year long. We were really impressed with, it wasn't just in our oats, we did some in corn as well. And so things were really showing up this year. It was cool early on, and this showed up all throughout the year. And this is the vegetation index, and you can see it, you know, you can see down in the left-hand corner there, the 530 of 2020 and 612 of 2020. This showed up all year, and even when we were harvesting, you could see there was a height difference in that 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen, there was a little bit of height difference there. So it was an interesting year to do a trial, I guess.
So it ended up being about a 25, 30 bushel yield difference. So 50 pounds of nitrogen is probably not something we'll leave off again. So lodging, I know that's always been a concern. Don't put too much nitrogen on oats. This was just a 50 versus 0 trial. I don't know what 75 or 100 pounds of nitrogen would have done if there's a higher end of this. But
yeah, like I said, it was taller, but it wasn't enough that there was lodging or any issues like that. It wasn't, like we said, Rains is kind of a shorter variety, so it wasn't too much taller anyway.
So the urea and AMS went on after we drilled the oats. I think they were up a little bit, probably a couple inches tall. Then we put it over the top. We used our strip till bar and just left it out of the ground. So that gave us a nice defined area. If we had the other options, probably a co-op that isn't gonna, it's harder to get yield data or application data back. So we just left the bar up and spread it over the top of the ground, and it got rained in. So
we did this on quite a few of our acres on either the whole field or left checks or did strips like this. So being able to apply it on our own gives us a little control.
And the AMS is some sulfur. I really don't know about oats. I'm assuming they're like corn. You know, we're finding the benefit to the sulfur, adding that back in now. So the one field that we put cattle manure on, we were planning on that being enough nitrogen. It was broadcast over the top. And then, you know, we drilled the oats so that the nitrogen we thought should be there wasn't. You know, nothing was incorporated, obviously. So I think liquid hog manure, we could probably get away with no nitrogen application. But as far as manure, the cattle manure, we're finding out the nitrogen isn't there for corn and beans when we're on top. So
it has plenty of P and K for us, but might be shortened just because we're surface spreading on top of the ground and not incorporating it. We might be shorting ourselves because the yield on that was it was probably a little higher than the 0 pounds, than the 84 bushel from this field, but it definitely wasn't as good as that urea AMS mix that we put on. We've been, I guess we can go back to that. Does anybody have any other questions on the nitrogen trial at all before we move on? And feel free, if you have questions, we can always go back to as well, but not seeing any. All right. We have been tile water monitoring since 2016 with Iowa Soybean Association. And for us, it was just short tile lines that we knew the acres that are getting drained. So we have control on it. It's not a lot of acres and we don't know what's happening on top of the ground. And so we started taking samples just to see kind of what's going on underneath the ground and what nitrates are coming out. In Iowa, nitrates are a pretty big deal coming out of our tile water. And so as you can see throughout the 4 years here, it's kind of gone up and down, but most generally, besides 2017, most generally it's been under that drinking water standard of 10 parts per million, not 10 PM, but 10 parts ppm. That was a mistake on my part, but and we've had fairly low averages, and there's been not a lot of water in some years. Like this year, we haven't had a lot of samples yet, but it's just something interesting to see. You know, in the 2020 here, it's on this particular tile line, it is corn after oats. So in 2019, that was under oats. In 2018, that was under soybeans. 2017 was under corn, and 2016 was under soybeans. So you can kind of go through that and see a little bit with that, but it's been interesting for us to visualize kind of where we're at and what we're doing. So, and we are anxious to see on this field what the yields come off of a year after oats with corn. You want to say any more on that?
No, just the 2019, the oats seemed to lower it down more than any other year, and now the corn, we're so dry in 2020. That's probably keeping the nitrogen down. We just don't have the water flow, but you know, we're obviously staying pretty low in a field with oats in the rotation as we look at it here just in the first couple of years. So.
I guess just kind of going through, do you recall what the fertility program was for the corn when it spiked?
We normally are pretty consistent in the corn. I can't tell you exactly, but we side dress and hydrous as our main nitrogen program. So that corn would not have had any early nitrogen until sometime in June. We would have side dressed and hydrous on that. So probably some residual nitrogen early from the soybeans the year before, and then that spike looks like right after application, sometime in June, July, you know, middle of the summer. We probably got some. Oh, we got our home phone going off here.
Sorry. Sorry.
That's Grandma that wanted to take the kids to the swimming pool. So.
Does anybody want to go to the pool? Grandma Becky is asking if anybody wants to go. We
have a family pass, so you're good to go.
Sorry about that.
So anyway, I'm guessing
we got a raised hand out there. That's awesome.
I'm guessing that spike would have come after our anhydrous application, and then some summer rainfall would have done that. So 2020, I think with more rainfall, definitely would see the line go up, but without the rainfall, we'll probably see some residual nitrogen show up next year in that tile line that's sitting in the soil, not moving. So I don't know. Hopefully that answered your question.
All right. I guess as far as, you know, our thoughts and summary on this, you know, for us, the oats really fit into, they fit in pretty well. You know, like we said, it spreads out that labor over time. So instead of just being spring and fall busy, we are busy a lot more, you know, during the summer and early spring, but yet it spreads it out. So it's not so much lumped into one. I think we'll probably plan on continuing to do it, especially as we look at the yields coming after that oat, that oat crop. The cattle manure, and you can see in that picture, you can see a big chunk of cattle manure. We were hoping that would help boost the yield right on that particular oat, but you know, we didn't see as good of a yield from that. So I think we'll maybe mess with that a little bit. Whether we add more nitrogen to that, I don't know, but we'll look into that. We've talked about the herbicide program improvement, you know, fall spraying as well as a spring residual, looking into things like that. And then another issue we kind of ran into this year was the cover crop that we were looking at for the 3 different kinds. We didn't get that planned out until basically when we wanted to drill. And right now, cover crop at this time of year of what we were asking for, it was hard to find. So getting that planned out, knowing what we're doing in the spring, even before we plant the oats, I think is something that'll help us out.
Question on the oat prices. Food grade oats, I'm not sure what a general food grade bid would be. I know this is a program with Oatly, and I don't know if, honestly, I haven't looked at other, you know, a generic price to know if this is the standard price at grain millers, but these were all $375 contracted ahead of the season. So I gotta repeat the question comment here. So somebody asked, it seemed generic oats at a delivery point are $2.50 a bushel. What kind of premium do you get on food grade oats? So through this program, they set the price last year and set it for us again this year, and it was good enough. So the $375 is a pretty darn good price. You know, that covers all your inputs, maybe making a little money. at 100 bushel an acre, and then you get the straw on top of that and a cover crop afterwards. So break even or less on corn and soybeans, it's not a bad program to go with. So last year we were almost hoping we didn't make test weight. I think a lot of cover crop oats were going in the $5 bushel range, enough to prevent plant acres. They were pretty short. So I think that, that oats is not bad if you haven't marked it and you probably just want to plan things out ahead of time.
Beth at Grain Millers said that they're buying food grade oats at $3 a bushel. Prices this year have fluctuated between $3 and $3.75. So.
Yeah, and I know the other option where we buy our oats at, the seed, we could be a seed grower for them. I talked to them about that a little bit. That doesn't have such a test weight requirement. I think they're down to 32 pounds. They need germination, not test weight. So that's another option to look at if you can find somebody that wants you to grow a specific variety for them. Another premium market would be seed oats. So beyond test weight and moisture, what other quality parameters must you meet for the Oatly contract? I think it's probably with all food grade. Some of the things, we didn't have a lot of parameters, but as far as cleaning equipment, it's not a lot different than raising seed for anybody else. You just make sure you have clean equipment. We needed to meet specs on no rye or too much of that other stuff. They want clean oats, so just making sure your field is clean to start with, equipment's clean to start with, and then we have to put not labels. We have to lock. They have locks you give them that have numbers on them, and so we have to lock the traps and the tarp on the trailer to deliver them, which is a little bit funny in our case because it's the same trailer that wasn't locked that went from the field to the bin. But then at delivery, we have to fill out some forms showing, if we were a different trucking company, we'd have to show that the truck wasn't open between the bin and the delivery point. So you are raising a food grade product, so you always kind of think about that. Just somebody's going to actually eat this, so kind of pay attention to it that way. Nothing in terms of protein. Asking about protein on the oats. So for this program, protein's not an issue. If you need to make feed specs, probably might be a concern. I don't know how much oats vary in protein, but maybe a concern if you're trying to feed pigs or cattle or something. So yeah, I don't know if everybody sees these comments, but Beth at Grain Millers has been helping us a lot. Grain Millers has been really supportive. If we have any questions, we call and they'll give us somebody to talk to. So that's been really good. They've helped us out whenever we need it. So test weight's the biggest issue. I think the farther you move south, the bigger hurdle test weight is. So everybody knows the Canadian oats is what people want, the 42-pound racehorse feed oats. So I think breeders are working on varieties. We're not Monsanto out here raising $300 bag corn, so we don't get probably the dollars going into genetic research, but they are working on it. So as those new varieties come, that helps a lot. So I see the comment about test weight, but they're looking for percent thins, other grains, vomitoxin. So she says those aren't usually a problem, but obviously anything that would be damaging to health, I'm sure they're going to test for them. We send a test in at harvest, and then we can't deliver till that comes back and passes, and then each load's tested. So yeah, I guess just work with them ahead of time and make sure things are within spec, and that goes for whatever your market is. Just as we do things on the farm that are closer to the consumer, instead of buying a bag of number 2 yellow corn and delivering it to the co-op, if you're raising something for somebody else, just need to be in contact with them and say, hey, what do you want if I'm specifically raising this for you? So that's kind of the biggest thing we see. Who along the supply chain handles dehulling and where the oats are getting processed? I'm curious how far the oats have to travel. As far as this program, I believe Oatly takes the dehulled oat and processes it further. And I'm not sure where the factory that these would get processed is, but Grain Millers is a miller, so I think Grain Millers does part of the work up front and then hands off a product that Oatly wants. So I honestly haven't ever asked that question, and maybe somebody else here can, at who does what in the process to turn this into an oat milk.
Yeah, I see Krista on the call. I'm going to put you on the spot if you have anything to add to what AJ. Oh, Sarah. Okay. Sarah says, exactly, Grain Millers mills the oats to whole oat groats and then gets sent to our oat-based facilities in Canada and New Jersey. So I think that answers our question here. Thank you. I've got a question as other people start to think about what sort of questions that they have. Kelly and AJ, you said that you have cattle and swine, so I'm just curious about if you are doing any sort of summer manure application and how that works with your cover crop. Are you typically dry spreading and then seeding your cover crop, or can you just tell us how that order of operations works?
Yeah, we haven't put any manure on after oats. Well, last year we did, didn't we? So last year we put it on, when did we do that?
Later in the year. But
Yeah, it was probably more the fall time frame or after that. But, you know, just having the acres there for us is pretty important. I mean, like we said, we haven't really used it a whole lot, but things happen in a hog barn, you know, or a deep pit hog barn. If water breaks and you get full here in, you know, July and August, we can get some manure out on the ground early if issues arise, or if we want to get some out just to kind of just get some out and ready for the next crop. You know, just having options available to us, I think, is pretty important in being able to know that there's 150 acres that we can apply manure to in August rather than in December or timeframes that we don't want to. Anything else?
No, I think livestock's a big piece of small grains, not necessarily oats, but any of the small grains. Because if you don't have a market for the straw, that's almost half the value of the oat crop. So you're giving up a lot of value. And then you've got a fallback for the grain. If you're planning on making food grade oats or planning on making seed oats or something goes wrong, you can always feed it to livestock. So it helps market a product that may, you know, if it doesn't work, you've got a backup. And you've also got a place to put manure, which is always a big deal in livestock. So even if you don't use it, you've got the option. So.
Great, thank you for that. I'm not seeing other questions coming in, but like I said, feel free to raise your hand or type those questions into the chat, and I'll ask another one while folks are formulating their questions. So you mentioned that typically you'll do some scouting in the spring for fungal issues, probably crown rust. Can you tell us what sort of stages of the crop you're doing that, and I guess why that's important?
Just, well, as the oats are developing, you know, spraying herbicides. I think you want 3 or more tillers before you spray like a 2,4-D or dicamba herbicides, and you don't want to do it after you get the crown leaf. Am I right? Or flag leaf. The flag leaves where you're then going to have the oats actually start coming out. So like a tassel in corn, then you get the ear coming out. So between that is fine. And I was told you want tillers on oats. That's going to give you yield. After 3 tillers, once you get to 4 and 5, those 4s and 5s don't usually produce an actual seed or grain. So you don't want to mess with it until you get 3 or 4 tillers. And then if it gets set back by a herbicide application or something, the extra tillers you may get aren't going to actually contribute to yield. And then you have some time until that flag leaf comes out. And then once you start the reproductive stages, you don't want to mess with it again. So protecting the flag leaf would be for fungicide. Once you get past that, you're probably, if you haven't protected it by then, you're not going to be able to rescue much. So scouting a flag leaf is probably the important one for fungicide application. So we have not, and especially this summer, we just haven't had a lot of rain. Both years we've had a lot of rust at harvest coming off the grain, or as we're combining, there's a lot of rust in the air on the equipment. But the agronomists at grain millers, they've been out and scouted both years with us, just want to come out and look at the crop. So they've assured us that at flag leaf time we weren't anywhere near any issues. So we left the fungicide out. But
it's kind of like our cash crop, just going out there every couple weeks or more, depending on, if we hear there's pressures, but looking for bugs and disease and weeds and just being out there. I don't mind walking out in an oat field when it's cool. It's a lot better than a cornfield when it's over 100-degree day. So.
What drove you to first grow oats, and what made it worth the learning curve change in practices? Were you growing oats or considering doing so before the Oatly market became available? Probably 10, 12 years ago, we raised oats as a transition to organic, and we're not organic anymore, but we tried it. And so I did have a little experience from a lot of years back. And then recently, we've added livestock since then, so that we've had trouble even getting enough corn stalk bales in the fall. You get the crop out and it just won't dry. The ground's wet. It's hard to make good bales. So getting some bales at a time, you get all that oat straw. That's really good feed or bedding, whatever you want to use it for. And then having a place to haul manure. We really haven't used the oats yet, but we were raising some rye for cover crop seed a couple years before that, and that let us haul some manure. So
we had just talked about we're going to try some oats this year, and we were talking about it. We were calling practical farmers, and then all of a sudden we got a call that said, hey, we have a program. So we kind of just fell into the Oatly program, which was a benefit to us. We were going to try it anyway, but I think we ramped it up more than we would have if that program had not been available to us.
So yeah, we were kind of headed that way. We bought a drill recently to do cover crops with, so we had a little better equipment for it. So we were just we'd been raising some cover crop seeds so that it fit and the option was available, so we kind of jumped on it. Would it still be worth it if you had to go organic if the Oatly contract required that? I don't know that we're ready to go organic yet. We're kind of farming that way aside from herbicides, but along with the corn and soybean contracts we have, some other things going on with our acres that I don't know that organic's the way to go yet. There's some benefits to farming that way, not totally for our farm yet. So there's other markets for oats. So I think that's always we probably still raise some oats. It's kind of an annual decision, and obviously I just talked about 3 or 4 years of planning, looking out ahead, but that's the same with going organic. Kind of how does that fit into our whole farm as an operation? So.
All right. I don't want to cut off this good conversation, but we are at our time. So Kelly and AJ, thank you again so much for your really helpful insight on, how to actually grow these high quality food grade oats. And if you didn't catch all the details in their presentation, the presentation will be recorded and posted on Practical Farmers of Iowa's YouTube page. And it looks like the Blairs have their contact information listed there and their Twitter. So I might have to check that out myself. And then this is just my last plug for this. Go ahead and fill out the evaluation once you exit the webinar, because we will use that to improve our programming. And I think that's it for today. AJ, Kelly, did you guys want to share any last thoughts?
Thanks for being on today and taking the time.
We're not going to have any food left over from this. Usually we get a week's worth of food left over from field days. So
That is true.
kind of disappointed with that.
AJ likes the desserts usually.
Next year, hopefully next year we can do it in person. We'll see. All right. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who attended. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.